I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the Soviet Union was very interested in UFOs.
It would not be surprising if saucers had crashed in the Soviet Union.
This is so far the best footage of an alleged crash UFO or a dead alien that I've seen so far.
Fact 1. For over 5 decades, Western governments have been collecting information on UFOs in strict secrecy. Fact 2. So did their counterparts behind the Iron Curtain. Fact 3. Now that the Cold War is over, the truth is finally out.
The notion that life from another world may have visited our own is an intriguing one. Many say that it is true, and that documentation exists to prove it, but that proof has been kept hidden from the public for over 50 years. With the end of the Cold War has come some intriguing, if not surprising, revelations. Western governments, apparently, have not been the only ones gathering information on UFOs in brutal secrecy. Hello, I'm Roger Moore. Join us now as we embark on an amazing journey of discovery, of international intrigue, and possible interplanetary visitation. Join us as we search for the secret of the century. The vastness of Russia is overwhelming, even to those accustomed to the wide open spaces of America. Huge tracts of eastern Russia are still uninhabited, and it was in just such a region, remote and far from civilization, that something profound happened nearly a century ago.
In the desolate Tunguska region of central Siberia in 1908, something fell from the sky and exploded on the side of a hill. This event triggered an enduring mystery that scientists are still unable to adequately explain. There have been other well-known cases of UFO phenomena, but it was the Roswell incident that changed the way that government officials thought about UFOs. Researcher Paul Stonehill has done extensive work chronicling UFO sightings in the former Soviet Union.
I would say that the most serious research was given the impetus by Stalin in the 1940s when he found out about Roswell. It was then that the KGB and the military separately had initiated studies of UFOs. The KGB, as far as we know, had never ceased studying them.
This Soviet Air Force footage was obtained by a group of Russian ufologists. It was declassified by the USSR's Ministry of Defense just before Boris Yeltsin took power. What we are looking at is a view from the cockpit camera of a MiG-23 Flogger, scrambled to intercept 2 unknown targets. What we see now is an apparent merging of the 2 targets. Here is the same shot slowed down. These are obviously not typical flight characteristics of NATO or any other conventional aircraft. The MiG lost visual contact with this object or objects, and there has never been any official identification. By attending international conferences and exchanging information over the internet, researchers on both sides of the former Iron Curtain have been able to increase the global understanding of anomalous phenomena. Richard Haynes has been to Russia many times and has worked with many of that country's researchers.
Soon after the perestroika, the fall of communism,
approximately 1990. I said to myself, I think this is the right time to initiate opening doors with the East, with people on the Eastern Bloc who are sitting on their own piles of data, but we don't know about it. Likewise, we're sitting on piles of data that they don't know about. And so I started corresponding with friends, and we formed this joint USA-CIS Aerial Phenomena Federation. And we're now serving a very positive role, which is information exchange.
The next clip was shot from a MiG-25 Foxbat, and what we're about to see is actually an American F-16 Falcon about 200 meters away. What happens next is that a new object appears from behind the clouds. It was not identified. The new object suddenly descends and disappears into the clouds. Once again, here is the American plane at the same altitude as the MiG. And now here is the object as it appears behind the F-16. And here it emerges from behind the F-16, then goes down and enters the cloud bank. As with all accounts or potential evidence of UFO encounters, researchers attempt to authenticate and verify related facts as much as possible. In general, the more spectacular the report, the more important the verification.
I was intelligence officer for the Soviet military for over 30 years. My son is a pilot in the Russian Air Force now. I can say for certain that there were numerous occasions where Air Force and Navy fighter planes intercepted what we thought were NATO aircraft, only to find that they were not airplanes as we know them, and not belonging to any nation on Earth.
It's no secret we would send planes into their airspace. They would fly into our airspace. It's like a game, like a test, constantly trying to test the response of the other side. Only sometimes, someone would get shot at. In this case, neither the Soviets nor the Americans seem to have any clue as to what this third object is. I'm telling you, even when you blow it up, it's impossible to identify. It appears to be about 4 or 5 meters across, moves with characteristics unlike any conventional plane.
Now, in this final piece of footage, we will once again be looking at a cockpit camera view, this time from a MiG-21. The camera plane and 3 others were scrambled to intercept an unknown craft flying at very high speed, which is visible here as a large, cylindrical-shaped object. And as the Russian planes close in, the UFO suddenly picks up speed and disappears. Here it is once again. You'll notice the cylinder seems to be traveling at about the same speed as the MiGs until about here. And then it seems to increase its speed, which, according to pilots, must have reached at least Mach 3 in about 10 seconds.
A lot of this footage was declassified after the Soviet military failed to identify the object seen here. This one shows an interception attempt by MiG pilots. There were many cylindrical object interceptions that were reported investigating. We were interested in the high-speed potential of these objects. The size of this one is estimated to be about twice the size of a MiG-21. With technology available to us and the Americans, it should not be able to move as fast as it does.
Hey, this footage is still interesting because I don't think the Russians had any idea what they were dealing with here. Their fighters were at least as good as ours, and yet here is something that is completely beyond their capability to intercept. The acceleration rate of this thing is impossible for any aircraft that we know of.
There was one tragic incident I know of occurring in the early 1970s, in which MiG-21s tried to shoot down an unknown craft flying over Western Russian airspace, which failed to respond to Soviet pilots. The pilots used standard intercept procedure to expel foreign planes out of Soviet airspace. When the craft did not respond, the pilots were ordered to lock on missiles. At that point, both jets were destroyed by some weapon not known to Soviet military. Both pilots perished. There was an effort within the Air Force to make it look as if the fighter planes collided, but investigators I knew personally at the time said it was not collision. They were shot down by something.
The NSA intercepted a radio transmission that we were copied on. Apparently, the Russians lost a couple of MiG-21s or 23s. They were trying to intercept something unidentified. All I know is it wasn't one of ours. You know, our department received a number of stories like this involving the Soviet military and UFOs.
One of the most intriguing stories we came across was first told in the new book, UFOs in the USSR, by Russian author Veniamin Grigorievich Vereshchagin. He recounts the crash of an extraterrestrial craft and subsequent recovery by Soviet officials in the late 60s.
Существует свидетельство тому, что осенью 1968 года
there is evidence to the fact that in the fall of 1968, there were reportedly a lot of UFO sightings in the area of Sverdlovsk, currently known as Ekaterinburg.
27 ноября многие жители поселка Березовский Свердловской области
On November 27, many residents of Berezovsky Sverdlovsk area observed several fireballs moving across the sky.
Вдруг один шар стал падать.
One of the balls began going rapidly down, and after that there was a loud sound of an explosion.
Через несколько дней после этого происшествия
In a few days, a Sverdlovsk paper published an article
в которой говорилось о том, что взрыв, услышанный многими,
which said that the explosion had taken place on the territory of a grain storage unit due to the carelessness of some workers. But the article also mentioned that the residents of this area had witnessed similar lights before that day.
This is a copy of the Sverdlovsk newspaper from November the 29th, 1968. An article on the front page entitled Berezovsky Dreams, or What Was That?, gives the state-sanctioned account of what could have been the actual crash. Translated, the Russian copy reads, 5 glowing balls of light appeared over the horizon and started to move in the direction of the city. 4 of the objects moved in opposite directions, while the 5th began to rapidly lose altitude and soon completely disappeared behind the forest terrain. Several seconds after its disappearance, there was a deafening explosion. And in typical Soviet fashion, the paper cites the official statement. The blast had taken place at the grain storage unit number 27. The explosion was caused by one of the employees who had violated the safety code, resulting in a charge of negligence. He was sentenced to restitution of the material losses suffered by the state. What helps make the account in Vereshchagin's book so compelling is the existence of several reels of film which seem to back up the story. While rumors of such film first began circulating some years ago, it was not until Vereshchagin led us to the black market dealer in possession of these materials that we got our first look at what could be remarkable new evidence. If this film indeed corresponds with Vereshchagin's story, what we are looking at is the scene of the crash site in Berezovsky as viewed by a camera on top of a military truck. The focal point of this scene is here, and indeed appears to be a disc embedded in the ground. Here we see soldiers exiting the truck, led by a captain. The troops are met by another officer, this one a major, and then they join other soldiers and officers already on the scene. This footage is one of 4 reels of film acquired during our investigation.
The 2 groups that have, without question, been exchanging information freely are the Russian and Western ufologists. It's with a sense of full cooperation that much of the formerly sensitive information has surfaced.
At one end of the spectrum are simple UFO sightings, which are often accompanied by film or video footage. At the other end are accounts of actual contact with alien beings, for which most bona fide researchers retain a healthy dose of skepticism. Interestingly, many psychiatrists and psychologists have placed considerably more credence in stories of alien abduction than ufologists. Though no such encounters have been officially reported in the former Soviet Union, and in spite of efforts by the government to deny their existence, documented cases do exist. Typically, the abductee reports seeing a blinding white light, usually hovering high above. These abductees have reported under hypnosis that they feel compelled to approach the light, as if they are somehow being drawn towards it. Some have reported seeing doors to the crafts actually opening for them. As with their reaction to the light, they feel compelled to walk through. Most abductees have not been able to describe the interiors of these crafts, other than recalling swirling mist and bright lights. Most reported alien abductions include harrowing accounts of medical experiments. Subjects describe an examination room of some kind. Many have reported strange probe-like tools being used on them, and they recall the frightening sensation of being examined, though simultaneously being unable to do anything about it. Typically, the abductees will then find themselves back where they were when they first saw the light, having no recollection of what just happened. Other times, however, upon checking their watches, they discover that several minutes have passed without their ability to account for it. They literally have lost time. Many abductees have their memories triggered by a mark found on their bodies, the kind they would associate with a needle or some other medical instrument. And not surprisingly, no such report has ever been verified 100%. And yet these stories continue to proliferate. Are these people really being abducted by aliens, or, as some now claim, by members of a secret government agency?
The austere building behind me once housed what was undoubtedly the world's largest and most feared intelligence agency. Why would the KGB be so interested in what many consider to be science fiction?
From the beginning of the communist era, the Soviet leaders relied on a strong secret police to act as watchdog and often executioner for their rule. This was not a new concept for Russia. During the rule of Tsar Nicholas, the secret police was everywhere, its agents spying on everyone. There were agents watching every train station, hotel, and theater. Shortly after the Russian Revolution, the first Soviet government approved the creation of their own secret police. It soon became a powerful mainstay of the Soviet system. To ensure the continuation of communist rule, the main domestic role of the secret police became to seek out counter-revolutionary views and ensure that those holding them were dealt with. After the death of Stalin in 1953, the secret police became known as the Committee for State Security, or KGB. As the Cold War heightened under Khrushchev, this was also the era that boasted the growth of the KGB's image as an international spy agency. Foreign espionage was at its height. According to Western authorities, the KGB managed to infiltrate every major Western intelligence service. During the height of its existence, the KGB was the largest secret police and espionage force in the history of the planet, with more than 300,000 agents. Its body consisted of 17 separate units charged with such concerns as counterintelligence, foreign espionage, and internal security. The division known as the Scientific and Technical Directorate was the unit responsible for the acquisition of top-secret technological information and materials, including those not originating on Earth.
The government body that had the most interest in anomalous activity was very possibly the Soviet military. Did high-ranking officers of the Russian armed forces really believe they could gain a military advantage from UFOs?
Though there has been much speculation on the exact nature of the Roswell incident and reports of actual alien beings, conclusive evidence of such encounters has proved elusive. In 1997, the U.S. Air Force issued a follow-up to its earlier Roswell report, which they subtitled Case Closed. They try to account for the stories of aliens by suggesting these were simply crash test dummies misidentified. So it was with a sense of both excitement and caution that we examined the footage recently recovered in Russia. This reel contains images of what appears to be a scientific or medical examination of organic body parts. The individuals seen here appear to be forensic pathologists or biological research scientists. Speaking in Russian, they are seen inspecting the specimen, the leader of the procedure describing his actions and the measurements they are taking. After several minutes of this, there is a change in camera angles. Now we see the specimen being more extensively examined.
Ткани разрезаются тяжело, кругом кусачки. Придерживайте. Ребра пытаюсь перекусить.
Tools are used to cut open what the leader constantly refers to as tissue.
Что-то белое попадает. Очень ригидные ткани. Давайте попробуем другим. Придерживайся. Вы не оцените этот лоскут.
He also describes parts that are removed as resembling various organs.
Записывайте, достаем внутренние органы, надрезаем похожую на клетчатку внутреннюю ткань.
The camera angle changes again. And finally, the scientists are seen posing for the camera, holding up various samples of the dissection. If this footage is authentic, it represents one of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time. One must wonder where this film was shot and what happened to the specimen seen. If this is footage of a genuine scientific examination, what happened to the results? What did the Soviets learn, and what have they done with that knowledge? Did agents of the KGB have reason to keep this secret for so many years? Certainly there are more questions here than answers. Russia has had countless UFO sightings. Some have been explained, some have yet to be explained. The best known events are the Downogorsk and Tunguska incidents. Many UFO researchers feel that the most important Russian incident in terms of known crash recovered materials is the Dalnogorsk occurrence. Antonio Huneas agrees.
It's the best documented crash because we do have the fragments. They have been analyzed. It was a small probe. It was not kind of a big object, but something crashed on a hill in Dalnogorsk in January of 1986.
Witnesses described the object as a sphere of light streaking across the Pacific region north of Vladivostok. Investigators later recovered materials including balls of lead and iron, bits of glass, and a fine mesh netting, all of which were tested and are proven to be highly enigmatic. The head of the research team concluded that the Downogorsk object was most likely an artificial space probe of non-terrestrial origin. Russia's best-known event, the Tunguska sighting, is sometimes referred to as the Russian Roswell. In the early hours of June 30th, 1908, peasants of the Tunguska River area in central Siberia watched in disbelief as a glowing round object with a fiery tail streaked across the morning sky. The object crashed in a remote region of pine forest, exploding in a brilliant ball of flame. Residual firestorms lasted for weeks and destroyed an additional 10,000 kilometers surrounding the crash point. Although the event preceded the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by nearly 40 years, the aftermath of Tunguska was frighteningly similar to that of the bombings in World War II. The result was the destruction of an area larger than that of Los Angeles or Moscow. Oddly, upon investigation some 20 years later, no impact crater of any kind could be found. Researchers have formed various opinions of what actually happened. The most common beliefs are that it was a meteorite fall, a ball of lightning, or an earthquake. Many have cited that none of these answers are possible and that the phenomenon was more likely the crash of an extraterrestrial craft. It has been speculated that the governments of many countries throughout the world have been gathering information regarding UFOs. Nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman agrees.
There's no question that military and intelligence groups overseas are collecting data, whether it's in Brazil or Australia or in England. So the KGB has collected information. I've talked to people who've gone to the Soviet Union, who have obtained some of that information. I have met a Soviet cosmonaut and other researchers over there. There's no question they're interested. And again, the republics which used to constitute the Soviet Union cover a huge area. They too were monitoring the skies because they were afraid the United States was going to bomb them. So when you monitor the skies, you pick up UFOs, no question about it.
During the communist reign, there was no official admission of Soviet interest in extraterrestrial activity. It has been only recently that this fact has been confirmed. The former secretary of the Commission on Anomalous Phenomena, Alexandra Petyukov, confirmed that an official state-controlled body did exist.
В рамках этой комиссии, когда в силу своей деятельности она начала планомерный сбор информации.
During the Soviet era, we started to regularly collect information from the public and received more than 15,000 reports. The thing is that the Commission was an official public organization. It had an official address.
Today, the mindset in Russia is far different from what it was during the communist reign.
Under communism, they were told that UFOs didn't exist, but just the fact that they were told they didn't exist made people believe that they did exist, because the government was also denying. They were saying there was no crime in Russia and accidents didn't happen. You know, I mean, that everything was censored and given this rosy picture, which of course people knew better.
It was in a small house on a side street near the Academy of Medical Sciences. The British and American spies met with informants throughout the 60s and learned of one of the most bizarre plots in the world of intelligence.
During my involvement for a period of at least 6 years, Soviet counterintelligence operatives played cat and mouse with Western agents in Moscow who were interested in our advanced technology programs. Some new weapons and propulsion systems were being developed, and the CIA was using any means to get information from anyone involved with the project.
Well, I was in Moscow for a year and a half. I had 2 other agents and a guy from the British Secret Service. We routinely debriefed 2 Russian informants who worked for the Ministry of Defense. We would exchange hard currency for information on new military technology. Some of this technology was definitely related to UFOs.
One way we often dealt with such incursions was to feed false information through double agents to give American and British bad leads.
Well, we knew the Soviets were onto something after we started getting all kinds of smokescreen intelligence. That was a sure signal that they were hiding something. It was an indication that they had recovered something near Sverdlovsk, and that they were keeping it very secret.
Senior research scientist Dr. Richard F. Haynes believes the Soviets had good reason to be interested in UFOs.
It's my understanding that the Soviet military has had a continuing interest in UFO phenomena for very, very many years. And the reason being that their air traffic controllers, their radar sites, their military pilots had been reporting things, just as ours had, and they had no explanation for them. And so the first possible explanation would be that it's a foreign nation test or espionage or something like that of a military nature. And if you're in the military yourself, then you take that very seriously and you explore it.
This film footage certainly seems to depict interest by Russian military personnel in the object that is seen sticking out of the ground. Soldiers, officers, and civilian-clothed agents are deployed around the site, and they appear to be both guarding and examining the object. This is what we found on one of the 4 reels of film obtained in Russia. After viewing the footage, we were able to determine that it was most likely shot with 2 separate cameras. One apparently a handheld camera, which starts out on the approaching truck, and a second one seen here on a tripod. As the soldiers march past, you can see the cameraman turn to follow the troops. Here we cut to the other angle, the point of view from the tripod camera. And here you see the handheld camera as the truck pulls up. Both cameras change vantage points several times during the film, as if to get better views or perhaps under orders of a superior. From this angle, we see yet more troops arrive. Author Veniamin Vereshchagin describes the event.
Весной же 1969 года рабочий местного совхоза
In the spring of 1969, a collective farmer found some strange remains in the forest not far from Berezovsky
и сообщил об этом,
and reported that to the local security organs,
те, в свою очередь,
who in their turn
обратились
asked the
за
neighboring
помощью
military division
соседнюю
of Air
военную
Defense
часть
Troops, PVO,
ВПВО.
to provide assistance with the
7
investigation. On March 1969, 2 KGB officers examined the discovery site and sealed it off.
Вы знаете, в дальнейшем события приняли более такой масштабный характер. По просьбе КГБ были привлечены
On the KGB request, a Soviet army unit was brought to the discovery site,
и в результате уже очень тщательных обследований были найдены
after close examination of the place. They found some wreckage debris of a disc-shaped object
частично.
partially sunk into the ground.
Поначалу органы безопасности предполагали,
At first, the KGB thought that the debris
американскому разведывательному самолету или
came from an American spying plane or a Soviet spaceship.
George Filer, a retired Air Force intelligence officer who was stationed at Langley, is not surprised the Russians were so interested in this object.
We found that the Soviets would pay to get information on UFOs as opposed to, we'll say, an F-111 aircraft, that they were, in a way, more interested in UFOs than some of our latest aircraft.